And good evening, and we're going to do this one. So this is the post-processing video for the that goes with the shoot behind the scenes video that you'll have seen on the channel a couple of weeks ago. So I've done a few of these images before, and we're just going to do this extra one. So we've got a lot of high contrast, high color, dynamic light in this scene. So there's a lot of we can affect this in many ways, and it's always good to just mess around with the sliders a bit. We can get all kinds of different effects just by messing with these. So it's worth just seeing where we want to be. I think for this though, we're just going to stick with the values that were recorded in the camera. This is not a special value, by the way. It's just whatever the camera was set to, but it doesn't affect what the camera records. It's just tells Lightroom where to set these when it opens the file, but you can change them. This value is no less valid than that value, right, that was set in the camera, because these are raw files, right? So none of this is baked in. It's just applied so by Lightroom so that we can see the image, right? So obviously you can't see a raw file. So let's play with another. We've got a number of aspects to look at. So I think this picture is broadly split into about 3 zones. You've got the figure, you've got the fog, and then you've got the darker pieces of background. So we can bring up the background a little bit by playing with the shadows. And I think we will do that. So we're going to put that about there. Now we need to see what's going to go on with this if we lower the highlights. Does it get better or worse? I don't think it really improves it. Let's play with the mid-tones a little bit. Get a bit more definition in there, but not too much. I might knock the highlights down just a bit. We're just looking at the skin now and the corset. And then we might bring the whites up, but no, I think that's posterizing the whites a bit. If you look at this spike here, now as we bring the whites up, what's happening is that spike's getting bigger, and what that's saying is there's a high count of values that are all the same value, right? So it's flattening it. So we're getting like areas where it's all the same value near the white point, and we don't want that really. So we want to kind of keep this as spread out as we can. So we're going to bring that back down, and you'll notice we can reduce it further. The more we do that, the more it all comes apart. So, and we can of course treat the figure completely differently, and I often do that. So let's go and do that. So we'll set up the masks and see if that gives us any other options. So Lightroom, we'll just do that. So while we wait, we'll drink some coffee. There it is. So it's pretty good at auto-detecting people these days. It's now going to further refine that into different things like face, body, clothes. Don't do shoes, but there you go. I think it's classed as clothes yet. But we just want the whole thing. Now you can see it's selected a couple of extra bits there, but we'll deal with those if we have to. But at the moment we just want to test it. Now you could bring up the exposure, but you see how the figure now starts to look a bit false and sort of pasted on and a little bit foggy. So I find the best way to increase the brightness of the figure is to just bring up the whites, and that kind of drags everything along with it, but in a more gradated sort of way. And I find that's much more effective. So we're going to go about there. Now, we could also try the next zone. Now if you look on here, we've got the whites are there, and on the histogram, the brightness is this next section along there. So we could push those, but I think, yeah, that's going to start to posterize things a little bit. So we'll leave that alone. And just to ensure it doesn't look pasted on, we can pull the other end down a little bit, which is the blacks, just to put that contrast back, because we need to match the level of contrast with the level of the background. And we can see what the effect is just by toggling that on and off, and I quite like that. Next I'm going to try warming up our figure. So we could go, that looks fairly neutral now. I've whacked that all the way to the end. Now obviously we live with a blue light to go along with with the colour scheme, but we can sort of push it and bend it a little bit, and we can push that magenta in there as well, but I don't think that's really doing anything for us. Or we can go somewhere in between. We could go even bluer, but I don't think that's the answer. That's about near the default. I think it's going to be somewhere in there. I want a little bit of a blue. Maybe we just push that up just slightly. And then we'll see where we come from. There we go. Okay, so she's looking a lot more vibrant now. I might just push the amount of the whole thing down, because I think I want to rebalance that background. So we're going to come out of this. You can leave that open, by the way, but I find that Photoshop slows down when that's open. And just undo some of this stuff that we did earlier. So I might just put a bit more highlights back into the whole thing. Yeah. And now, of course, we need to just take it off the figure a little bit. Let's click back on our mask. Just dial it off, lift slightly. I think that's good. I think that's good to go. Now there's some other just non-exposure type adjustments we need to do. So we'll click on remove the chromatic aberration. This is Lightroom has a database of these things of corrections for each lens. So it auto detects the lens from the metadata, and we can also straighten it. It does also remove any lens vignetting, and sometimes I just quite like that. So we might, I'm going to undo that. So we're just going to go for the distortion corrections, but we're not going to correct the vignette. We're also now just going to make it absolutely upright, because I think this image kind of does depend on that, and it just looks like it needs to go that way a little bit to me. And she's a little bit small in the frame, got a bit too much floor, but we'll do something funky with the floor in Photoshop, and I think we're good to go on that. Let's just move me out of the way of the histogram. I can probably do final adjustments to black and white point when it comes back from Photoshop. So always launch Photoshop from Lightroom, by the way, because if you don't, then your new picture, your edited picture, is going to be free floating. We want to see it back in this film strip. So if we just right click and do edit in Photoshop and wait and drink some coffee, as Thierry Coubet would say. If you haven't found Thierry Coubet, go and watch his channel on YouTube. He does product photography with inexpensive equipment, relatively inexpensive equipment, same sort of stuff that I use. He's very, very good. And we'll wait a bit longer. I need to get a new computer, really. This is about 12 years old. There we go. Here we are. So I do apologise for any sort of crashing and other things we may have to deal with. Right, so the first job in Photoshop is cleanup. So we need to remove all of this extraneous stuff. Don't need that for the time being. So we're just going to start off with the polygonal lasso tool and just draw roughly around these little weird pieces on the edge. So we've got the beauty dish up the top there that we used. And we're going to do fill. And then make sure that says content aware and press OK. Now I've got a lot of shortcuts set up on mine. I'm not going to tell you what they are for the most part, because I've changed them from the default, so they're not going to make any sense. I've got a feeling that one is Shift F5 or something by default for the fill, but you can find them in the menus. And then we're just going to deselect that. It's got a bit of a black border around that, which is a bit odd, but we'll deal with this bit first and then come back to that, I think. So again, same deal. I don't want to try and preserve that little edge of that bit of fog if I can on this bit, so we'll go as close as we can. I'm holding the space bar, by the way, to move the picture. Let's make it a bit smaller. Same deal, F5, content aware, and we'll let Photoshop chew on that. You could use generative fill and all those new things, but I find that for this, content aware is usually good enough. It's done a few funky things there. So to deal with that, I'm just going to duplicate the layer. I'm using a pen. This is a Wacom tablet. It's a really old one. It's bamboo. It's a really small one. It's a really cheap one. And I really like these cheap tablets. I did try one of the big expensive ones, but I couldn't really get on with it. I was moving my whole arm about, and there just isn't room on my desk anyway for that sort of stuff. So I'm just using the good old clone stamp tool here, just to randomize this a little bit, because don't want that. Content aware fill does tend to sort of extrapolate lines, and whilst some of them are okay, you know, we don't want to see just entire lines like this just going away from. So we're just going to randomly mix this up. Like so. So it doesn't look like it's just. And if I put that to half strength, so 50%, stay away from the edge. Then we can really start to just terminate it slightly, you know, so provide a mottled, sort of darker bit on the edge here. It's looking a bit funky, isn't it? So let's make up a new bit. So again, we'll do content aware fill on just that patch there. There we go. That doesn't look too bad. We can just see what that looks like before and after. Yeah, okay, yeah, that's good. That looks fairly natural. Got a little bit of a pattern down here, so we'll just take that away, I think, there. And we don't really want that bit, or that bit. There we go. Looks like it could have happened that way. Right, so you see, that's where we were with the content aware fill, and that's where we've now made manually with the clone stamp tool. That's not too bad. So we'll collapse that down. Is there anything else to clean up? So happily, the fog is hiding pretty much everything else. We'll have a quick look around, zoom in, have a quick look around. Do we see any cables or light stands sticking out of the fog anywhere? Also any dust on the sensor. I know where the dust spots are, but I don't see them in this image. They don't always show up. When you're underexposing. I think we're good. Yep. Okay. Right, now, there's nothing really there's no bumps in the clothes that I really need to pay attention to. We would use the liquify tool for that. We'll fire it up anyway. I think we're just going to spread the hair out a little bit. So in we go. using the forward warp tool, and we're just going to use small dabs just to sort of tease it out a little bit, like so. There's nothing else really that we need to do. Well, there's some sort of crinkles and strangeness around here. We can try and put some shape back into that, I think. Just try and put curves into this rather than straight lines. Which I think is just going to look a little bit more natural. So Liv put this costume together. This is actually a dress. It's like a sort of a tube. It's terrible. But the bottom half, the skirt bit, actually looks alright. So she found that in the bottom of my wardrobe bag, well, both of these things really, and stuck that over the top. We didn't think this would really fit. She's really small. But yeah, we did it up all the way, and it was okay. So no clamps were required. Right, okay, that's all we need to do with that. So just come out of that. Actually, that's looking a bit the wrong way, isn't it? So go back in. Missed that bit. I need that line to match, really. So let's just push that bit as well. Now try and make the forward warp tool about the same size as the curve that you're manipulating. And we can just push some of these. That's looking like a bit of a crinkle there, isn't it? So let's push that in a little bit. And that one as well. And then we can always see our before and after like that. There we go. Perfect. Right, let's do skin cleanup. So we'll start off doing the difficult bits with the new remove tool. And the difficult bits are things that kind of like are on the edge of things, which I didn't really see, to be honest, but we'll demonstrate it on these marks. That's not a scar, that one. It's a contraceptive device. These are scars. And we've got some little spots here. Now there are lots of these, so we may be better off doing these with the healing brush. Not the spot healing brush, but the regular healing brush. So this is a sort of semi-intelligent tool, which covers it covers with a sample. So you sample from there and click there, and the way to do it is to just go down in one direction so that you're not, putting one blemish over the top of another. So you need to sample from above somewhere, but pay attention to the shininess, because you need to kind of match that a little bit. But this is a really fast tool to work with, rather than the intelligent remove tool, which does some heavy lifting with the GPU. This one is pretty fast. Now we don't want to remove every crease that we see, otherwise we'll just end up with a flat person. But that's about right. Now we'll go in 100%. We can do the face, start at the top, and make this a bit smaller. Let's go over any brow creases. Spots. Now I could use a remove tool for this because it's on an edge, but of course before the remove tool we would have just done that, just line the edge up and it'll work just fine. Just takes a bit more effort, but overall it's probably faster. on this computer anyway. This is a 2012 3rd gen i7. So, you know, it scores about 6,000 on the, I forget which benchmark it is, but it's one of the well-known ones. Which is, you know, not too bad, but these days we should be looking in the sort of 19,000-20,000 range. Now, this isn't a full, you know, face image, it's a full figure image, so the face isn't going to be that big in the frame, so we don't need to go overboard with this, and we're going to apply some global techniques to the skin in a minute. No skin folds under here. So we're good to go on that one. Nothing on the arms. Let's go down to the legs. Anything to do down here? Not really. Even the knees are good. Look at that. There's just the slightest hint of a crease there. Let's go across that. So yeah, you get to know where models have got permanent marks on them. And of course, when you're retouching images from the same set, you'll notice all of the local ones as well, or temporary ones. But Liv doesn't do anything crazy like clambering up rocks and trees and things, so she isn't constantly covered in scars and cuts and bruises. So that's all we need to do, I think, for that. So now we're going to just homogenise the tones a little bit on the skin. So we're going to set up a frequency separation layer. And we're going to go for, I think, 5. Now, the idea behind that is that you blur, that anything that's blurred is going to be on the detail layer, the high frequency. And anything that wasn't blurred in that dialog box is going to be on the low frequency. So that amount of blur sets the boundary between these two as to what goes up there and what goes down there. Now, we almost exclusively work on the low frequency, so the whole purpose of the high frequency layer is just to save the skin texture. And so the more blur I put in that dialog box, the more stuff goes up onto the high frequency layer as texture. I just know from memory, from experience really, that when the figure is about this big in the frame, that 5 is the right number. If I was doing full face, just a headshot, it'd be about 8.5. Because the texture the texture is bigger, right? The skin texture is bigger in scale. So we'd need to just adjust the boundary, and we can see immediately. In fact, I'm going to use the patch tool to do the selections. Not because I need to use the patch tool. It just draws a little bit faster, and occasionally I need to use the patch tool on the high frequency layer, but I'm probably not going to need it this time. Now I'm doing a Gaussian blur with this selection, and I've got repeat last filter bound to a button on my tablet, so that you'll hear me hammering that. It's up here on the menu, so it is that. So Alt Control F. Who can be asked to do Alt Control F? So I've got it on a button, and you can do the same, you know, or just a key. As I don't use most of the shortcuts on Photoshop, so you know the keys are available. And you can see that makes a really good difference. And we can still see the texture on the skin, which is what I was just want to make sure that we can do that. So let's just draw roughly around here. We will do some masking on this in a minute. And if this was a full body or a nude figure, I would just use select subject to do this. In fact, we may do select subject in a minute anyway for other purposes. Now we don't really want to do the hands because they've got too many little features and things on, but we need a bit more of these corners. So if you hold the shift key you can add to the selection, and if you hold the alt key we can take away, so we don't really want that bit. Okay, so let's add a bit more in there, and we can add this bit back in. And we're probably going to mask it off the tattoos. Is if you blur things like creases and things like this, then it's going to be obvious that you've done something to the skin. But as long as you put all that back, you can sell this all day long. So I'm going to do two lots is about standard for body skin. And now we're going to, or upper body anyway. The legs very often have a bit of mottling. And we can see a little bit of it on here, hidden partially by the fog. I think what we'll do to this is we're going to use the mixer brush in a minute as well. So we'll just do a base level of blur on it. Which I think will be okay. That could do with a bit more. That bit there. Doesn't matter what I do to that. But these bits we want to retain the structure. Right, if I just make it completely flat, it's going to look a bit odd. Now, I very often mess this up, so I'm going to make a copy of that layer, and then I'm going to select the mixer brush. And on the mixer brush, we've got 30 for everything apart from the flow, which is 10. But the important bit is this, right, which is no ink, right, no paint. So all it's going to do is spread the paint that's already there, spread the colour that's already there in the image. And we can use this to just straighten things a little bit. You can use Liquify to do this, but it's a bit heavy-handed sometimes. So we just go over each little zone, like so. And remember to sort of follow the direction that these things are going in. It is just like painting, so you're painting on top of the picture, and you can see if we just toggle that layer on and off, we can see that we've sort of denobbled the knees a little bit. We'll come over here and do this side. We can also kind of straighten and extend and elongate these highlights, which I find is very effective now, especially if you've got models that are a little bit more curvy. We really don't need to do this with Liv. She doesn't really have any kind of excess curves on her at all, so there's nothing to do there really. But you can also extend these little highlights, but they're not too strong on there, they're not really strong enough to do it. Try it on there a bit, which can make everything look a little bit more coherent and slender. But again, you know, when you've got a model like Liv who's already very slender, you don't really need to do anything like that anyway. So I think we're kind of good to go on this. Might be a little bit more we could do there. There we go. But don't forget there's a lot of fog in play here, which is responsible for some of this mottling. Now, if we toggle this on and off, you can see that it does destroy edges and things, so we don't really want that. So we're going to mask it off. So we'll put a white mask on, get a black brush, So just check that it's 100% soft, get it down to a reasonable size, and all we're going to do is just go around the edges. Now we can toggle off just to see is there anything on here that would benefit from it being masked off, and we might just benefit from yeah, there we go. Now we want to be careful that we don't introduce dark patches, but just on those where the highlight is strongest, because we want to retain that shiny nature of that. So we don't want to kind of like even it out, if that makes sense. Now, just make sure, I'm a bit paranoid about making sure that my brush is still black, because I have been known to paint for ages with this, not realising that I've set the brush to white and nothing is actually happening. I've just been kidding myself that I'm seeing a difference, although we didn't get close to the edge on a lot of this stuff. Now we want to make sure that we've got all this definition back in and all these nice crisp highlights. So again, we'll go over the tattoos, the folds like that, and creases, anything like that, because we've worked quite hard, you know, to light this with hard light to make sure that all this definition happens. You know, and also things like hair, eyes, mouth, nose, around the edges, ears, anything with detail, clavicles, collarbones, that kind of thing. Oh. Just again, just toggle it on and off just to see if there's any bits that we've missed. You can see what a difference that makes to the face, which I'm really pleased with the way that's gone. Just going to make sure that's pasted in. There we go. Okay, if you want to see where we've drawn, by the way, you can hold Alt and click on the mask, and that's going to show you that. You see I've completely missed this border here, around there. So let's check that again. And I've got it on white. I told you I'd do that. So it is worth checking that. Let's check that again. There we go. It looks more reasonable. See, I've missed a bit on the elbow there. Oh, sometimes it does that. Just to annoy you. Missed a bit there as well. Of course we didn't do the hands, so that's okay. It's looking good. So look down here, see if there's anything we missed. So there's a bit there. And there we are. Okay. Right, let's have a look at it before and after. It's quite subtle really when you zoom out, but you can see here that's definitely improved. The knees are improved. But that's about it really. So let's collapse the layers. I don't keep all the layers, it just slows things down. There's no point really. And you can run into issues later on. Now, we're going to do some my alternative way of introducing a contrast curve. So we're going to make 3 duplicate layers, all with the screen blend mode. Ah, my eyes. And we're just going to go back to the background and we're going to do a select subject. Let Photoshop do the heavy lifting. I've got it set to do this in the cloud, by the way. It uses a much more computationally expensive algorithm, which is more accurate. So it uploads a little miniature picture to the Adobe server farm, crunches away and sends the selection back. And there we have it. So I'm going to save this because we may need it again for something else. Let's call it model. Right, so I'm going to put these in a group, Control G, and I'm just going to apply that selection as a mask. So now I've got a white mask, so those layers are now constricted to the subject. It's done a pretty good job on the hair as well. If it doesn't, you can use the select and mask tool, the middle brush, and start outside the hair and push in with the brush, and that will refine the hair a little bit, but we don't need to really on this. Right, so now we're just going to turn off 2 of those, and now we're going to use my old friend, the Blend If sliders, which is a way of gradating any effect. And in this, we're going to take it off the shadows because I just want to brighten just the highlights. I'm going to do this in zones, which is why there's 3 layers. So at the moment, I'm just looking at the legs, and I just want to get some more into those highlights on the legs. So I'm going to hold the Alt key down, split the sliders now, and move that all the way to the right. And now I can just further play around with this. Just have a look at each bit because we're going to mask this on in a minute. So I'm not paying any attention to what the upper body looks like. Okay, we can flick it on and off, and just looking at the legs, it's about right. I'm going to put a black mask on, get the brush, 100% white, soft brush. We're just going to paint over the leg area. Now I didn't really want it on there. I think that's just too much. It just flattens that area out, you see. The rest of this, yep, I think it's looking pretty good. Don't want it on the skirt. Now let's toggle. Yeah, that's about right. Okay, next layer. Now we're going to look at the rest of the body, so we're going to be a bit more aggressive with the slider. So we're going to go all the way. I'm just looking at the chest area really. And all the way up there, and then just put that off there and then mess with it a little bit. And of course we can alter the overall opacity of this. I don't want it on the skirt. So again, I think we will just put a black mask on. I could start with a white and then take it off things, but I think this will work just as well. Now, do we want it on there? No. Or yes. No. And we're going to dial that down a little bit to about there. Let's have a look at the whole effect. Yeah, that's pretty cool. Might just ramp that up slightly. Now, I don't think we need the 3rd layer. If there was another zone, I could use that for that. And obviously I could make more layers as well. But I think we're good. Let's toggle that on and off one last time. Yeah, looking good. I'm not bothered about blown out highlights in this image because she's wearing a silver outfit, and this is a piece of plastic, you know. It's going to have blown out highlights on it, so not bothered. Am I bothered? So it's asking me, do I want to discard this layer, which I do. So there we go. So that's pretty much done, I think, in terms of the contrast. So now it's just time for the fun bits. There's one last thing to do. We're going to create another layer, and we're going to do some edge sharpening. So I'm just going to take the colour out of it and do a high pass layer, which is sort of edge detection, but just at a really low 2 pixels, and then we're going to apply that with overlay. And you're probably not going to see that on there, but it just it's a bit like adding a little bit of texture or sharpening, but I quite like the way that works. Right, fun bits. Let's collapse that down. Oh, one thing we might do is just try a bit of glow on it. This doesn't always work with these images, but I'm going to apply this layer to itself using multiply. You could do this just by making 2 extra layers and putting the top one to multiply and then blend and then collapsing them. Doesn't really matter. And then we're going to set the blend mode of the resulting layer to screen. Then we're going to blur the whole thing by the same number of megapixels that the camera has, which in my case is 45. And because it's overall increased the brightness of everything, I'm going to put a curve with it and just drag that down. And I know it goes about 115, something like that in the middle. Put these in a group so they're together, and then we can toggle it off. You can see overall the level of brightness is about the same, but it's really strong, so we don't want as much of that really. So if I stick it down to about 30% and then just check whether we like it, it gives it a kind of like what it's doing is it's blooming the highlights over the shadows. Now, some photographers will tell you that this is a way to bring detail out of the shadows, and of course it isn't. It's just it's smearing the highlights over the shadows and making them lighter, but it's not bringing detail out of them. It's covering it up, in fact. But it does lose detail overall. So it's a question of whether we prefer to have maximum detail or a little bit of glow. And you can dial this right down. So if we go down to 20%, it's quite subtle. And I think, is that better or worse? Do you know, I don't think I'm going to bother on this one. I'm going to get rid of that. We're just going to stick with this. Okay, so the next thing we need to improve is the floor. Right, it's just a bit of grey cloth. Now there's a number of things we could do. We could put in some textures. I've got a number of floors that I like, that I've been using a lot. And I've just added these 2 Aurora shots as well as backgrounds. But we've got a wooden floor, which don't really go with this. We could go for the Giant's Causeway. But I think, or a bit of quartz there, which is a very shiny floor. But I think in this case, we're just going to put a reflection in. So we're going to duplicate the layer, just make that small, and do Edit, Transform, Flip Vertical. Let's make it a bit bigger. Now, just so we can see what we're doing, we're going to set the opacity of that to 50. Get the Move tool, hold the Shift key so that it only goes in one direction, which is up and down, and we're just going to do it on the shoes. So we want to get that as close as possible, and then we can ramp up the opacity again. And now of course we need a mask on this, so we're going to put a black mask in, and then we can get our brush, white brush, soft white brush, and just paint this back. Looks pretty good. Now we can kind of like, oops. We can finesse this a little bit in the middle. And again, check where we painted. There we go, it's all filled in. Now, obviously we don't want it on the shoes, so we're just going to make our brush really small, put it to black. We're just going to go around the edge of the shoes. and some other things that we're going to do to make this a little bit more realistic. Now, I don't want to reduce the opacity. Normally, if the floor was any good underneath it, I might just reduce the opacity to make it, I mean, it actually might work, but the other way to do it is because reflections are never exactly the same amount of brightness. We could just put a curve on it, and we only want it on that layer, so we're going to pin it, or create a clipping mask, as they say, and then we can just lower the exposure on that. You can see what a difference that makes. It now looks a little bit more realistic as a reflection. Now we could, as I said, we could put something shiny in here, which we could combine with that reflection. So with that in mind, if we put that on there, just put this layer on top for the time being. It needs to be a bit bigger, so hold the Alt key down, just drag it to the same width. That'll do. Commit that. Now again, just to speed Photoshop up, I'm just going to rasterize this, because I don't need to make it smaller and bigger again. We're going to set the blend mode to overlay, I think, for now. But we need it to, we kind of need it to be laid down on the floor, I think. So we're going to get the move tool and just move it down to about there. So do we want to use a, yeah, we might want to use it, because we're going to mask a lot of this off in a minute. Now we're going to do a control. No, we're not going to do it like that. Are we going to do it like that? No, we're not going to do it like that, because it needs to come from the horizon, this stretch, this perspective thing. So we'll come out of that. We're going to get a selection and say that the horizon is about there. So it's about there. Now we're going to do a transform on that. And we're going to right click and do perspective. And then we're just going to drag out the bottom. And we're going to look around the area around her feet until it starts to look like it's about the right angle, and just commit that. Now I can put this in a group, deselect that, get back our selection of our model that we had earlier, which is that one, and just make sure that it's masked off. And now we can see it nicely disappears into the background, but we've got it all the way up the image, which we don't really want. So let's go and get rid of that. So we're going to use this layer. We're going to put a mask on this layer as well. And we are, well, actually we're going to turn that black just to turn it off, because it'll be, there's less to go on. We just need it down here really, and up the side, maybe up the middle a little bit. And there we are. Now we have our sort of shiny glass floor. Now to blend it into the fog, there's one more thing we could do. Rather than try and do it with the brush, we use blend if again, and we're just going to blend it off areas that are white. So if we start to come to about there where that starts, and then split the slider and go across like that. So we can bring it in a little bit more and just see the effect of that. Might be a little strong. We've got to make a decision, I guess, as to whether we prefer the reflection of the clouds or the texture on the floor. What looks best? It's somewhere in between, isn't it? So I think if we just back this off back it off all the way, get the other one. Sometimes you have to move the other slider out of the way, like that. I think better or worse? I think that's about right. We can see just normal reflection or with the texture. We can also back it off, of course. You know, we've got control over the but I do quite like the sort of leading lines that it gives us into the image. Gives the image a bit of depth. I think maybe there. Yeah, quite like that. Something different. Right, finished with that. So we're going to collapse all of that stuff. And the last thing I'm going to do, well, I say the last thing. I may decide to do other things. I think we'll put a star field on. So we'll show you optics, because I really like optics. I've been using it for a while now. And it is a lot of fun. In fact, I'm going to bring those layers back because I'm thinking we're going to put the stars under here as well. Yeah, because that's at 100%. Because we don't want the stars on the model, obviously. We're just going to make a new one of these. Or do we want to do this because we want the stars in the floor as well? Yeah, let's not. Let's flatten it. Because I can always make a new folder. So make a new copy. And we're going to go down to Boris FX Optics and use the night sky generator. And it is in the render tab. There's loads of things on here, and I'm not going to show you, give you a tour of optics at this point, but we will do that in a future video, I think. So we want night sky, and there it is. But I'll let you into a little secret. This generates accurate night skies. Right, so you can set the what on earth is this? You can generate accurate night skies. So you can set the latitude and longitude and the time. So I have a preset which is set to Winsford, which is near enough. So somewhere in the UK, northern UK. And we're now just going to set the time and date of the image. So if we go back to Lightroom and just cycle the image info, we see we've got 14th of April at 17:07. So if we put April as there, 14th, 17, and you'll see the star field shift. Okay, so if it had been dark, which of course it wasn't, but had it been dark at 7 minutes past 5, on the 14th of April 2024, and you were looking in the right direction in the sky, I can't remember which direction I put it in, this is what you would have seen. And I just quite like that. All the star fields in my shots are accurate for where they are, which was confirmed the other day when I used the aurora shot that I'd done as a background, and I couldn't work out for a while why I seemed to have dual images of the stars with this effect on, and I realised I'd got actual real stars, the same stars, in the shot. So it is accurate. Now I might just use a bit of artistic license and get rid of that one though, because it's a little bit bright. That's possibly Jupiter or Venus or something, I don't know. But anyway, just so that I've got full control over this, I actually don't need the picture, so I can just dial off the background brightness. I just want the star field, and so we'll just apply that. I mostly use this to make star fields and sun flares. So especially if I'm shooting outside and you want a bit of lens flare, because you just don't get lens flare these days. Sometimes there's a few odd things when it exits, but it has put us back in Photoshop this time. And we're just going to set the blend mode of that layer to screen, which means it's just going to assert itself over anything that's darker. And I think, yeah, I'm going to get rid of that one at the top. So just going to edit the universe a little bit. There we go. And we're going to have a look around for any that kind of don't make a lot of sense. I think we can live with that one. I quite like the way that is in the cloud. That one, potentially not. But we actually do want a few down here. But as I said, we don't really want it on the model. So as well as that mask, if you want two masks on a layer, put it in a group. Right, now you can have another mask on there. But before we do that, we're going to bring back our model selection. And again, we're going to hold the Alt key and apply a mask, which is going to get rid of it off our model. So that's it. And again, we can toggle on and off just to see if we like it. That one is a bit bright. So I'll go back on my other mask. Yeah, like that. There we go. So we'll flatten that. Now we're just going to do, last thing we're going to do is in Photoshop anyway, so just a little bit of selective sharpening on the eyes, nose, mouth. There's anything else? Edge of the hair, I think we'll do. And that's about it. Okay, so let's save this. Make sure this says background. Sometimes even though there's only one layer, it isn't actually flattened, and it will then save a whole bunch of stuff you don't really want and make the file size big. These should pretty much match. The document is 255 meg and as opened is 288 or something. So we'll just save that. Wait for that to do. It seems to take a long time these days to write a 288 meg file. Sometimes it just takes ages and you go away and do something else. But it will eventually save. There's Frank. I've watched that video already. Took a lot of inspiration actually from Frank years ago when I first started doing this. He's a really good guy. So if you don't follow him already, go and do so. He's got a YouTube channel, does workshops in the Netherlands, in Emmeloord, all kinds of stuff. Right, okay, I think we're done. But just in case we need to edit that more in a minute, we'll leave Photoshop open for the moment. And your edited picture should arrive next to the original RAW file in Lightroom. And if we want to do a bit of a comparison, we can select them both. Let's get rid of the info, and we can see where we started in Photoshop and where we finished. And if we want a complete comparison, actually, we can go not there. What's happened there? Okay, that's become selected. Let's go back to develop. And we can go back to the beginning. Actually, we could just reset it, couldn't we? Because that'll be an extra step at the top. So if we do that, add a reset, so we can see a full before and after of the wrong pictures. So let's deselect that one. They're the wrong way round, so let's click on that. There we go. So we've got where we started and where we've ended up. So keyboard needs plugging in. We'll do that in a minute. Hopefully, I think you can see that our nice shiny floor is a lot better than this bit of grey cloth. And by adding the texture, it looks like the floor continues past her, whereas if we just had the reflection, it might not look as passable. But I think that's a good result. Now, the final touches to do to this, just make sure we've just got that picture selected, is to just maximise the black and white points to get the maximum contrast and dynamic range. So we'll just bring up the whites by about 10, and we'll turn the low light warning on and just dial the blacks down. We can go all the way, but I don't think we need to go that far. So I think we'll go probably about there. Now, we'll just have a look at the sort of before and after, which, bear in mind, this is before and after we did these final edits, right? So this picture was, if you look at the steps, that's all we've done, blacks and whites. It starts off there, edited in Photoshop, that's where it entered the game. And we can just see we've just got a little bit more. So that's before, that's after, before, after, before, after. Just thinking we need to bring the black point back up a little bit, just on the this area. So we'll draw a nice little gradient just over that bit, bring it in, and just bring those up a touch. Not that much. In fact, we may just bring the shadows up rather than the blacks. There we go. So now, let's get rid of that framework. Liking that. Okay, let's commit. So now we're going to do our export. So I'm going to press Control Shift and E to bring up the export dialog box. I'll go over here, and I'm going to need wallpaper, which is the full screen one, and also a slightly smaller one for Purple Port. Now, although this is a vertical image, Purple Port doesn't put any restrictions on how tall an image is, but I'd like it to fit on the screen. Right? I've seen a lot of people, they post huge images when they're vertical on Purple Port, and you can't see them unless you view them full screen by pressing F, but who's got time for that? So they post them so big that all you can see is the middle part of the image, and that just doesn't make a lot of sense to me. So on most people's HD screens, which are 1080 pixels tall, with the paraphernalia at the top and bottom, about 900 pixels tall is the right size to fit an image on a full screen browser. So we do batch export, we'll choose the parent folder, and we need to go to what did I call this? We go Kiln April 24. select and export. There we go. And while that completes, there it is. I'll come back to that in a second. But we're also going to make an Instagram version. And Instagram cannot post, even those phones are taller than this, right? It cannot post an image that tall. It won't do a 2x3. Closest it'll do is a 4x5. So we're going to use the print module to do this, but we're just going to print it to a file. Bizarrely, it always shows you the last image that you did. So I've got a template here that's just going to pad it out to 4x5, but we're going to change the border colour, I think. So if you hold the mouse down on this pad, you can just drag it outside of the pad. Nowhere does it tell you can do this in the documentation, and that means you can then start to sample colours from around the image. Right, so do we want to go for a sort of a purple up the top? But I quite like the way that little thing looked down there, actually. And then of course you can just adjust it, but I quite like that. Now I've got a little logo on this one. It's looking a bit lost down there. We might need to just increase the opacity of it just slightly. And then I can do a printer file, and we're going to go into the Insta folder, and it behaves completely different if you're doing one file than if you're doing multiple. So I have to do this manually when I do one file at a time. So we're going to make Insta6 and save it. Now, did I do that in the right one? I think we're going to do one without the identity plate as well, because obviously I'll give this to Liv. She might not want that on there. So we'll do another printer file, and we're going to call it Insta 6.2. There we go, and save that. So that gives us our two Instagram versions. Now, if there was any nudity involved, if there were any nipples or anything like that showing in the image, I would also then, I've got some brushes that I would cover those up with to do my Instagram version, and then crank those out. Now I could do all this in Photoshop, it'd just take a lot longer, because you can just put stuff on like this in Lightroom, and it's not doing anything to the image. So there we go. One last thing, it's always worth checking. I know we put a lot of effort into putting gels and all kinds of things on the lights on this. If we go back to the develop module, we'll just see what it looks like in black and white. Now, there isn't a lot of point in this one, but sometimes it's worth having a go. So we hold the key down, and it does look pretty good actually. So what we'll do, just to see what we can do with the black and white, is we're going to create a virtual copy, and we're going to set it to black and white. And just so that I can see what I'm doing, I'm going to set the before to that step, because I don't want it to go back to the colour when I do the before key, which is the backslash. And I'm going to do Australian style black and white, I think. So this is how Peter Coulson does his in Adobe Camera Raw. Set the contrast to maximum, the shadows to maximum, the blacks to maximum, and then adjust the midtones, which Lightroom calls exposure, and maybe bring the highlights down a little bit to about there, the exposure to there. And then again, as I say, we can hold the before, and just to see, does it look better or worse? I think it looks a bit crunchy, if I'm honest. This works better with soft light images, I feel, which is where Peter normally uses it. So we'll back it off a little bit. So we'll dial, make sure I'm not on the before. We'll dial the contrast down a little bit and bring the blacks down and the shadows down. Unfortunately, because this is global, you can't do a sort of amount. to this adjustment. I suppose I could put a gradient over the whole thing and then do the same adjustments, but then it doesn't quite work the same when you do that. Yeah, I think a little bit, bring the highlights up a little bit. There we go. Blacks down a touch. Maybe bring the whites up some more. I think the blacks need to come down, don't they? I don't want to lose that dark sky, really. I don't know. I'm not convinced. So let's go back to normal black and white. And now we can just be more aggressive with the black and white points, because it's not going to alter the colour, because there is no colour to alter. Take the highlights out a little bit, put the whites back in. Before and after, it's just a touch more contrast. Just before, put some shadow back in. Yeah, I think it looks all right, but I don't think it really adds enough to warrant publishing a black and white. I think this looks okay. We could put more contrast in it maybe, but nah. Anyway, so I'm going to stop tinkering with it now. I think this is looking pretty good, and the sun is starting to come up, so I'm going to retire and go to bed. So thanks for watching, and look out for more videos coming soon.